Good afternoon. We're looking at this chapter 14, nervous tissue, to cover in human anatomy class. We've covered a lot of this chapter already, so some of this will be repetitive a little bit from earlier modules, module 1 and 2, lower limb and upper limb. But then there's a few topics that are new for this third module on head and neck region. So we'll just kind of review some slides and then go over some new slides as well. So the nervous system introductory slide here shows sort of the overall functioning of the nervous system as an example here. The body's primary communication and control system is how we sort of define the functioning of the nervous system. And in the figure you can see how some sensation is stimuli are triggering these receptors that are generating an impulse through the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron is located in along the nerve path here, the axons bundled within nerves, the cell body located in the dorsal root ganglion, and then the axon continues into the spinal cord. And in this image we're looking at a reflex, which we by now know is where the brain is bypassed to generate a motor response without the time, the reaction time required to send the impulse to the brain and back. But in essence, without a reflex, the sensory impulse is sent to the brain. The brain is where integration occurs, where the information is processed and a motor response is coordinated, and then that motor response is sent as an impulse transmitted through a motor neuron, the cell bodies of which are in the anterior horn, and the axons then enter the anterior root and then form eventually here part of a nerve that goes to the effector, which in this case, in this diagram, is a muscle in the arm that's going to carry out the response. So the idea is that there's monitoring the conditions in the internal and external environment. The body can then respond to any sort of conditions that need response. Now we can divide the nervous system into both functional divisions as well as structural divisions. And if you recall, structural refers to the actual physical components, tangible parts that, you know, how these neurons look, for example, or different parts of the nervous system, the actual structural features, or how we would divide the nervous system into the structural divisions. Functional divisions are going to be meaning have a reference to the actual things that the is going on, the actual processes. So we'll see the difference here, starting with structural divisions. So the physical separation of components of the nervous system are divided between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And as you know, the central nervous system consists of structures that are found in the axial region, such as the brain and spinal cord. And then we have a sort of structural separation between the axial division, and then everything outside of that central nervous system region is part of the peripheral nervous system. So here we're looking at cranial nerves that come from the brain. We're looking at spinal nerves that branch off of the spinal cord, and ganglia, which by now we know are structures that house that house cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, outside of the central nervous system. We can divide the nervous system functionally, again, and in relation to what is going on, the processes that are going on, into either sensory or motor divisions. And synonyms here for sensory include the afferent division, meaning toward the central nervous system. So here impulses are traveling toward the central nervous system. And the motor division, or efferent division, efferent meaning away from. So here we're referring to motor impulses that are being transmitted away from the central nervous system. And that can be further divided into various components. So sensory division is divided again into somatic sensory versus visceral sensory. Somatic sensory division of the sensory division of the nervous system refers to sensory receptors and sensory neurons that are transmitting impulses for sensations or sensory information from skin, from fascia, within the joints, the position of our joints, in other words, which gives us the sense of proprioception, knowing where our body parts are. Any sort of pain or stretch associated with the skeletal muscles, and then even our special senses, hearing, vision, taste, sight. It also includes our general senses, which would be touch, temperature, pain, and pressure. Visceral sensory information includes information such as temperature and stretch in the walls of our stomach or our urinary bladder. Also, so just basically viscera refers to organs. The motor division can be further divided into somatic motor and autonomic motor. Somatic motor refers to innervation of skeletal muscles. Autonomic motor division refers to those involuntary components, so impulses that are triggering or communicating with the heart, smooth muscle in vessels or in viscera, and also stimulation of glands. All right. We've talked about how the characteristics of the two types of cells that we find in the nervous system. Neurons being excitable, meaning they can transmit impulses. Glial cells cannot. Neurons having a high metabolic rate and extreme longevity. Basically, we have most of the neurons we have today and into our elder years were produced during fetal development. So after the fetal period, neurons no longer divide as commonly. And the glial cells are, in contrast, reproducing and therefore have a shorter lifespan or shorter longevity. All right. Oh, high metabolic rate also refers to the fact that we always need oxygen and glucose for the energy that's required to transmit those nerve impulses. Here we're looking again at a basic neuron. You should be very familiar by now with the cell body. The processes that are transmitting impulses toward the cell body would be dendrites, and you can have we can have anywhere from one to several dendrites attached to a cell body, versus a larger, longer axon, which is transmitting impulses away from the cell body. And here we're looking at a neuron that's myelinated, so we'll sort of review myelination here. And then the terminal ends of the axons are referred to as axon terminals or teleodendria, with those synaptic knobs, which is where a synapse is going to occur, meaning that the impulse transmits from these synaptic knobs to the next cell in line. So we'll be talking more about that today. All right. We can not only can we functionally versus structurally classify the whole nervous system, but we can use those classification divisions for neurons themselves. So you're most familiar with functionally classifying neurons as sensory or motor neurons. And so both of those types of neurons are found in both the sensory or the central nervous system as well as the peripheral nervous system. Sensory neurons may be associated with sensory receptors. Motor neurons are not. And just like the nervous system can also be referred to as the afferent division, we can refer to these neurons as afferent neurons. The motor neurons are within the efferent division, and so can be called efferent neurons. And instead of being associated with sensory receptors, motor neurons may be associated with effectors, and effectors are going to be muscles or glands, anything that's going to carry out the response, basically. All right, so here we can see, again, sensory neurons transmitting impulses toward the central nervous system, motor neurons sending impulses away from the central nervous system. And so this could also be called an afferent neuron or an efferent neuron for the motor neuron. Now an interneuron, you can see here connecting or basically transmitting the impulse from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. And so we do have interneurons. About 99% of our neurons are interneurons. They are entirely within the central nervous system. We do not have interneurons in the peripheral nervous system, which means that they're not going to be part of nerves. They receive nerve impulses from many other sensory neurons and transmit those impulses to motor neurons. And they carry out similar function as the brain, an integrative function where they are sort of guiding the transmission of the impulse to the correct location, to the correct motor neuron. So they receive sensory information and then direct that impulse to in the correct direction for specific motor neurons. All right. We can also structurally classify neurons based on how they physically appear. So we're looking at unipolar neurons, bipolar neurons, and multipolar neurons here in the next slide. All right, so unipolar neurons are shown at the top here, where you see the cell body, and there's only one process extending away from the cell body. So again, we've talked about this before, but just as a review here is hopefully helpful. There's a long process, basically process extending from the dendrites directly into the axon. So this whole axon could actually be myelinated all the way to the axon terminals here, or teleodendria. So that one process makes it a unipolar neuron. And unipolar neurons are characteristically sensory neurons for our general senses, which are touch, temperature, pain, and pressure. A bipolar neuron is shown here, and here you can see there's two processes extending from the cell body. One process is the dendrite, the other process is the axon. So this is characteristic of sensory neurons that for our special senses. So we have bipolar neurons for vision, for smell, for taste, for hearing, and for equilibrium or balance. And then multipolar neurons, you can see the cell body here has multiple processes extending away from or towards the cell body. Multiple dendrites, but always just one axon carrying the impulse away from the cell body. So here are two different examples of multipolar neurons. Multipolar neurons are basically the motor neurons that we have in our nervous system, somatic motor neurons, and also interneurons are multipolar neurons. So we're going to pick up from this point in the next video clip to talk about specific glial cells. We can see our next topic is on glial cells. So that will be the next video clip to review.